He had once believed his heart had shattered so completely it could never break again. But that day, in the stinking landfill outside Kansas, a breath so thin it might have been a thread cracked it open once more. Jonathan Reed was 62, a former machinist with calloused hands and hair gone silver. He had grown accustomed to emptiness. 6 years earlier, he had stood at his wife's grave, listened to the dull thud of earth on the wooden lid, and in that moment vowed he would never let another grief crush him. Since then, he had lived like a shadow. Long days spent in the empty, clappered house, the ticking clock his only companion. That afternoon, with the sun leaning red over the southern dump, Jonathan meant to cut across the glass-studded path home. He expected nothing but the smell of burnt plastic and the familiar drone of flies. Then, the sound came. At first, it was so faint he thought it was wind through an empty can, a ragged, intermittent wheeze. Fragile, as if some small life were being choked out. Jonathan froze. His old eyes swept over torn plastic bags and yellowed styrofoam, and then they stopped. In the middle of the heap, like a sodden scrap, something moved. He squinted. Pain stabbed his chest. He stepped slowly, each footfall heavy. When he drew near, his breath lodged in his throat. It was a Doberman puppy, not more than a week old. Its skin was pink, paper-thin, so the tiniest veins were visible. Its eyes were still shut. Its head could not lift. Its body trembled. White foam bled from its mouth, tiny rivulets running down its chin and soaking into the filthy ground. That sight knocked the wind out of him. Cold ran along his spine. He knew the sign. Not a simple illness, not exhaustion. Poison. Someone had laid bait here, not merely to kill, but to let killing happen quietly, in a dump where no one bothered to stop. Jonathan stood numb. An old voice echoed in his head. "Move on. It's just a dog. Don't invite more pain." Perhaps that explained why so many had passed without bending over. He pictured shoes, jogging shoes of a runner, the high heels of a hurried woman, flip-flops of prankish boys. All had passed. No one had stooped. Then memory hit him. The last night in the hospital, his wife's eyes had looked straight at him, cloudy but resolute, as if to ask, "You will stay, won't you?" He had kept that promise until her last breath. Now, in the unopened eyes of the tiny creature, he saw the same silent question. He sank down. His hands trembled as he lifted the small body. Good God, it was as light as a handful of cold mud. Its skin bit into his palms. A thin, whistling sound escaped its throat, weak but enough to tear the thick air. Jonathan swallowed and whispered, "Don't give up. Not like this." A wild berry still clung to his coat from a hurried pick at the fence. He tossed it aside. The sweet, tangy taste in his mouth curdled bitter. He understood. Nothing sweet in the world mattered if he could ignore that wheeze. He stripped off his old jacket and wrapped the tiny frame. Mud soaked through the cloth, cold seeping to his skin, but he felt nothing except the fragile breath at the core of that small life. Without a second thought, he sprang up and ran out of the dump. His heart thundered. Sound drained from his ears. The sky flared with sunset while distant engines and barroom laughter rolled past like noises from another world, an indifferent world, a world that abandoned. For him, there was a single pounding command. Save it, save it, save it. His battered pickup squealed as he slammed the door, tossed the trembling body onto the cracked vinyl seat, and sped away. Wind lashed his face. Tears and sweat blurred his vision. Billboards, neon, the blare of horns, all ordinary. Too ordinary for a moment when life hung by a thread. Minutes more and he would burst through the animal clinic door, into white light and sterilized smells. But on that dust-choked road he held the shivering form to his chest and murmured like a prayer, "Little one, If the whole world turns its back, I will not. The glass door of the veterinary clinic crashed open with a sharp clang. Jonathan stormed in like a gale, clutching a bundle of mud-soaked cloth in his arms. The reception staff jerked their heads up, startled by his sweat-soaked face and eyes burning red as if lit by fire. "Emergency! Please, she's dying." His voice rasped, strangled in his throat. Dr. Laura Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with hair pulled back in a tight knot, spun around. Her eyes cut like blades when they landed on the fragile life in Jonathan's arms. "On the table! Now!" she barked, not from anger but urgency. Jonathan laid the bundle on the cold steel slab. The fabric fell open, revealing a Doberman puppy, no more than a week old. Its skin was paper-thin and flushed pink, its eyes still sealed, its mouth foaming, breath broken and shallow. The air in the room shifted. A nurse rushed forward, rattling a tray of instruments, the metallic clatter striking against the taut silence. "How many days old?" Laura shot the question. Jonathan shook his head, voice trembling. I don't know. But less than a week. Her eyes aren't open yet." Laura froze for a heartbeat, then bit her lip. "Dear God. If that's true..." She snapped to action. "Fluids. Heat pad. Now! We're out of time." Jonathan stood rigid. Before his eyes, a needle no thicker than a hair slid into the pup's fragile leg. A bead of bright red welled up before the drip began to flow. His heart sank like a stone. He whispered, voice cracking, "She's still breathing. Please, save her." Then a man's voice broke the moment. From the waiting chairs, a heavy baritone, arms folded, eyes cold. "It's just a dog." Is all this fuss really worth it? The words struck Jonathan like a fist to the temple. He wheeled around, eyes blazing. "Just a dog?" His tone was low but unshakable. "No, she is a life, and if she dies right here before us, then a part of our humanity dies with her." The room went silent. The man dropped his gaze, offering no reply. Only the faint beeping of the heart monitor filled the space, steady but fragile. Jonathan leaned closer to the tiny form and whispered, "Listen to me, little girl. I've lost my wife. I've lost too much already. Don't make me lose you too." Laura laid a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was firm, yet touched with compassion. "You need to step back. Let us do our part." Jonathan nodded, but his eyes never left the trembling body on the table. In that instant, he understood. This was no longer just a discarded puppy from the dump. This was a test, whether he would turn away like the others or cling to the faintest thread of hope. In his heart, a name had already formed, though unspoken. Hope. He gripped the edge of the table, feeling each drip of the IV, each labored breath. Tonight, the battle had begun, and he knew. It wasn't only a fight for the puppy's life, it was a fight to pull himself out of the abyss of despair that had swallowed him for years. The small clinic smelled of disinfectant. White lights poured down onto the steel table, casting Jonathan's weathered silhouette against the cold wall. He stood there, hands trembling and interlaced, eyes fixed on the tiny life curled beneath the white cloth. Beside him, Dr. Laura Mitchell fitted her stethoscope and leaned close to the puppy's chest. Her brow knitted, each line on her face carved deeper. "Weak heartbeat, but it's still there," she murmured, voice hoarse with tension. Jonathan swallowed. His throat felt raw. He scarcely dared to breathe. Each beep from the monitor was a knife to the heart, slow, scattered, as if it might stop at any moment. "We need a blood test now," Laura said, lifting her head with a decisive calm. A nurse handed a tray. Metal flashed. A fine needle was inserted into the pup's tiny leg, and a drop of bright red blood welled before the IV began to run. Jonathan gripped the table's edge, his heart thudded like a war drum. Images rose behind his eyes, blood spilled by comrades on distant battlefields, his wife's blood in her final months at the bedside. Loss every time. His hands had always been helpless. He whispered, "Please, not again." The nurse worked quickly to prepare the sample. The room sank into heavy silence, broken only by hurried footsteps and the clink of instruments. Time stretched taut. Then the door banged open. Laura returned with the test results. Her eyes had gone dark. She placed the sheet on the table and looked straight at Jonathan. "There are traces of a poison. Rat bait." The room seemed to collapse. Jonathan felt his knees give. He clutched the table to steady himself. "No, that can't be. It's only days old." "How?" Laura inhaled slowly, her voice grave. "There are two possibilities. One, someone fed it directly. But if that were the case, it wouldn't have survived this long. Two..." She hesitated, then let the rest fall. "Through the mother's milk." Jonathan snapped his head up, eyes wide. For a moment, the air itself stiffened. "Mother's milk?" he repeated, voice shaking. Laura nodded. "If the mother consumed bait, the toxin passes into her milk. The pup nurses, and the result is..." She left the sentence unfinished. Jonathan understood. His chest tightened. The image of the puppy gasping in the dump burned behind his eyes. Another question, sharper and colder, rose in his mind. Where was its mother? He turned, voice thick. "If it's through the milk, where is her mother now?" Laura did not answer immediately. She bent to adjust the IV line in the pup's leg. Only after a long moment did she say softly, "If this hypothesis is correct, we have to go back to where you found it. The mother may..." Jonathan clenched his fists. Heat rose in his chest. His breathing quickened. He knew how brutal the answer could be. He also knew he could not look away. He looked down at the little body shivering on the table and, for the first time, spoke the name that had been echoing in his heart since he scooped the pup from the dump. "Hope. Her name is Hope." He reached out and touched the tiny cold paw. "You won't suffer alone anymore." "I promise." Laura's gaze softened a fraction. But the atmosphere in the room remained taut as a drawn string. Each passing second edged them closer to the border between life and death. Jonathan thought silently. If the mother did not survive, then at least he would uncover the truth. He would bring her home. She deserved more than to be left in the trash. He tightened his knotted hands and stared out the window at the streetlights throwing pale patches across the pavement. A slow, smoldering resolve kindled within him. Once hope was stabilized, he would return to the dump. And he would not go back alone. That night, Jonathan remained in the clinic until dawn. He never took his eyes off the tiny body on the steel table, as though a single lapse in attention might cause that fragile breath to vanish forever. Hope still clung to life, her chest heaving, white foam sometimes bubbling at her lips, each spasm twisting his heart. When the first rays pierced through the window frame, Dr. Laura entered with a clipboard in hand. She looked worn after a night of vigil, yet her eyes stayed steady. "Jonathan," she said softly, "we need to return to the dump. I fear her mother." Jonathan did not wait for the rest. He understood. Fear surged, but so did a crushing sense of duty. He rose, nodding slowly. They climbed into Jonathan's battered truck. Tires ground against the dirt road, dust clouding behind. When the dump came into view, the midday sun beat down mercilessly, scorching everything beneath the dry Kansas heat. The air reeked of decay. Trash mounded like unmarked graves. Jonathan pointed to the place where he had found Hope. The soil had dried, leaving a shallow impression where the pup once lay. He swallowed hard, heart hammering. Laura moved carefully, eyes scanning through tall weeds and torn cartons. Suddenly, she stopped, lifting her hand in signal. "Jonathan, here." He rushed over, then froze. Not 50 yards from where Hope had been, tangled in a patch of grass, lay a larger body. A female Doberman, gaunt to the bone, her dark coat caked with mud. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and her mouth stiff with dried foam. Her body arched in frozen contortion, as if seized by agony. Jonathan staggered, his breath caught, knees threatening to give. For a moment, the world fell silent. No wind, no flies, only those staring eyes, a mother's eyes. Laura knelt, gloved hands probing gently. Her voice quivered. She died from the bite as well, likely pregnant, starving. She must have eaten whatever she could find, and she still forced herself to give birth before collapsing. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her. His hand shook as he touched the stiffened fur. A hot tear slipped down his weathered cheek. He whispered, "You gave everything, so your child could breathe." In his mind appeared the image of Faith, the name he had whispered for his late wife. Now he knew he had to give this mother a name as well. Faith, a final trust, poured into her pup's fragile life. He bowed his head, whispering through sobs, "Faith, I will raise her for you. I swear it." Laura laid a hand on his shoulder, giving a gentle squeeze, saying nothing. The noon wind carried the acrid stench of trash, but in that instant, Jonathan heard only the silent weeping inside himself. That afternoon they carried Faith's body back to Jonathan's home. He laid a white cloth over her, wrapping with care as though tending to kin. In the garden, beneath the old maple tree, Jonathan and Laura dug a grave. Each strike of the spade against the dry earth cut into him. At last, they lowered Faith down, unwrapping the cloth so her face could meet the light once more. Jonathan murmured, "From now on, you will not lie in filth. You will rest here, under the tree, where wind and light can touch you." He carved into a rough wooden plank. Faith. She gave life. As the earth fell back over her, Jonathan's throat closed. He pressed his trembling hand to the fresh mound, tears streaming. In that moment, he was not only burying a dog, he was laying to rest years of silent grief, years of numbed indifference. Laura placed a wildflower atop the grave. She looked at him and said gently, "Perhaps hope will bring you back. And Faith, she has given you a chance." Jonathan closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. His whisper rose like a vow. "Rest, Faith. I'll guard your child with everything I have left." The evening sky deepened, clouds stretching in long bands while the last light of day washed the garden in a sorrowful gold. Beneath the old maple tree, the fresh mound of earth still damp, Jonathan knelt, dirt-stained hands gripping the handle of the shovel, his breath ragged. He looked at the small grave where Faith, the exhausted mother dog, now rested. In his eyes, it was not simply the death of an animal. It was the death of a mother who had poured out every last ounce of life to pass it on to her child. Jonathan touched the rough plank he had carved with a worn knife. Faith. She gave life. The letters were crooked, uneven, but each cut in the wood felt carved into his own heart. He whispered, "You've done your part. Now it's mine." Tears dripped into the soil. He stayed there a long while, hands clasped in prayer. Memories surged back. His wife's last shallow breaths, the pleading eyes begging him to remain. Now, In the glassy stare of faith he had seen at the dump, he read the same message. Don't abandon my child. Laura stood a few paces away, silent. She had witnessed many animal burials, but never a 60-year-old man sobbing on the ground like a child. She understood. This was not just the loss of a dog. It was a man's atonement to the heart he had long kept shut. Jonathan placed a white chrysanthemum, trembling, plucked from the garden. He whispered, Faith, you'll never lie in garbage again. You have a grave, a name, and I will raise hope as though I'm raising the very reason I still breathe. He rose, wiping his face with soil-streaked hands. Yet instead of exhaustion, his eyes shone brighter, as if he had tapped into a hidden vein of life. In that moment, he understood. Faith's death was not an ending. It was a message, a bridge linking him to hope. Night fell. Jonathan's wooden house sank into darkness, but on the table a kerosene lamp glowed, lighting his figure beside the small nest of cloth where Hope lay. The pup was still frail, but her chest rose more steadily than it had that afternoon. Jonathan bent low, voice warm yet trembling. You're not alone anymore. I promised your mother, and I'll keep it. From this moment, you are my family. His calloused hand rested on the cloth beside the tiny body. The touch was gentle, but he could feel her faint, stubborn warmth. In his heart, an invisible thread stretched from the grave outside to this fragile nest. The thread of faith handed down to hope. Laura entered, carrying a bottle of replacement milk and a dropper. She saw Jonathan whispering to the pup, and her gaze softened. You know, she said quietly, sometimes they don't survive because of medicine. They survive because they know someone is waiting for them to fight. Jonathan lifted his tear-filled eyes and nodded. I'll be here. Every minute, every second, midnight. The clock struck 3. Jonathan still sat there, head resting against the chair, hand gripping the nest's edge. A faint sound stirred him awake. Hope whimpered, then shifted. Jonathan's heart raced. Her breathing was shallow but clearer. He bent close, whispering, That's it. Fight, little girl. I'm here. Through the window, the old maple stirred in the night wind. In his mind, Jonathan heard Faith's voice. Hold on to her. Let her live for me. He closed his eyes, pressed his hand to his chest, and whispered through the catch in his throat, I promise. I'll never turn away again. 3 days later, the Kansas morning still pressed down with heavy, stifling heat. Jonathan sat motionless on the wooden chair beside the little nest, eyes shadowed, hands clenched tight. He had not slept a moment through the night, just listened to each faint breath of hope, dripping like seconds on a fragile clock, every moment dangling by a thread. The first light slipped through the window, falling on the quilt where Hope lay. Suddenly, a small movement made Jonathan hold his breath. The puppy twitched, stirred, and then the wrinkled lids, sealed tight since birth, trembled open. It felt like a blow to Jonathan's chest. He bent forward, heart pounding. Dear God! His voice broke. Hope opened her eyes for the first time, cloudy, unsteady, but alive. They wandered uncertainly and then stopped. On his face, Jonathan's throat closed. Tears spilled as he whispered, You can see me now. You're still here. Dr. Laura, just stepping in, froze. She leaned close, listened to the faint, raspy breath, and gave a small nod. She's crossed back from the edge. Jonathan. She still has a chance. Jonathan's hand trembled as he let the tiny tongue brush his fingertip. Such a small gesture, but for him it was a miracle. He lowered his forehead to hers and whispered, Your name is Hope, and you will never lie in the dirt again." That afternoon, Jonathan drove into town to the small leather shop. He did not buy food or toys. Instead, he ordered a collar, tiny, plain brown leather with a bright silver tag. On it, he asked for a single word: Faith. The craftsman looked at him with puzzled eyes. Jonathan gave a faint smile. "That's her mother's name," he explained. "She gave everything so this little one could breathe." When the collar was finished, Jonathan held it in his palm, the metal cool against his skin. Inside him grew a solemn resolve. This would be the thread binding past and present, faith to hope, death to life. That evening, Jonathan carried Hope, her frail body still trembling, out to the back garden. The old maple whispered in the wind, its shadow stretching long across the fresh grave. He set Hope on the grass. Her steps were shaky, wavering. But somehow, she walked straight toward the mound, as though pulled by an unseen string. Reaching it, she sank down, clouded eyes fixed on the soil, silent. Jonathan knelt beside her, laying the collar and a single white rose on the grave. His hand trembled as it touched the wooden marker carved with Faith. His voice cracked. "Faith, I kept my word. Your daughter is alive. This is your collar, so Hope will always know her mother never left." Hope whimpered, then scraped the soil with her tiny paw, as if reaching for the warmth now gone. The gesture broke Jonathan. He covered his face, tears streaming. "Little girl, your mother won't return, but she gave you her life, and now you have me." He lifted Hope into his arms, holding her against his chest. Her body still shook, but her breathing was stronger. He felt her fragile heartbeat against his own, like a hymn of rebirth. That night, Jonathan spread a soft blanket beside his bed. But Hope did not stay there. She stumbled up, rested her head on the edge of the bed where his hand hung down. Jonathan stroked her gently and murmured, "All right, sleep here. From now on, I'll never let you lie alone." Outside, the night wind rustled through the maple, bearing witness. Jonathan closed his eyes, and in his heart, a voice seemed to rise from far away. "Raise her as your own, and never turn away again." He whispered back, eyes blurred with tears. "I promise, Faith. I promise." In the weeks that followed, Jonathan's small wooden house began to change. The lonely ticking of the wall clock no longer echoed through a hollow silence. Instead, the floorboards caught the click of tiny paws, the soft whimpers of Hope's dreams, and the steady rhythm of her breathing, like a lullaby every night. Jonathan often sat in his old armchair, the newspaper slipping from his hand, eyes following Hope's stumbling steps. Her body grew stronger, thin legs holding steady, her once clouded eyes now bright and filled with hunger for life. Each time she looked up at him, her gaze was no longer just that of a puppy. It was the look that redeemed a heart long shut. Every morning, Jonathan carried Hope onto the porch. Kansas sunlight streamed through the rows of maples, lighting the sleek black coat sprouting anew. Hope perked her ears, listening to birds, sniffing the damp earth after rain. For Jonathan, it was the first time in years the world felt alive again. He often whispered, "You didn't just survive. You're teaching me how to live again." Yet the place of his joy was also the place of his haunting. Sometimes Jonathan drove Hope back to the maple in the garden where Faith rested. Each time, Hope walked straight to the grave, sat, and laid her head against the rough wooden marker carved with the words, "Faith, she gave life." Jonathan sat beside the grave, his hand resting on the rough plank of wood, whispering, Faith, rest easy. Your daughter is growing stronger each day, and I will never abandon her. One evening, Hope did something that stopped him cold. She lowered her head onto the wooden marker and let out a long, peaceful sigh. Jonathan wiped his tears, choking back a sob. That's right. Your mother is still here. And I will be the one to keep her promise. Dr. Laura dropped by from time to time, watching Jonathan teach Hope to drink, to stand, to take her first steps. She smiled and said, You know, it's not just Hope who was saved. It's you too. She's saving you. Jonathan said nothing, but he knew it was true. Since Hope came into his life, his house was no longer a box filled only with painful memories. It had become the starting point of something new. Every night, when Hope curled at the foot of the bed, Jonathan placed his calloused hand on her back and whispered, I promised your mother, and I promise again now, I will never let you be alone. Sometimes God does not send us miracles of grandeur, but tiny, fragile creatures who seem hopeless, reminding us that to save them is to salvage what humanity remains in us. Faith was gone, but she left behind hope. And hope, with her frail yet unyielding existence, had awakened the hardened heart of a man who thought he had died in grief long ago. Jonathan looked at Hope and smiled faintly. He knew the journey had only just begun. Then, one afternoon, as he carried Hope out onto the porch, he noticed a figure pausing at the gate. A man in a worn coat, face lined with age, eyes flicking toward Hope. That look held no sympathy, but something harder to read. A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. He clutched Hope against his chest, staring at the stranger. The man only smirked faintly, then turned away, walking off with slow, deliberate steps. Jonathan stood frozen. A dark intuition stirred in him. Faith's death might not have been an accident, and the path to protecting Hope could be far harsher than he imagined. The story closes here, but it is far from over. Jonathan has kept his vow to Faith. He has given life back to Hope. Yet the shadow that appeared has planted a new question in his heart. Was the tragedy at the dump truly random, or was there a hand behind it? Do you think the story should end here, or should we uncover the truth behind Faith's death? Do you want to hear part 2 of this journey, where Jonathan must face new darkness to protect Hope at all costs? If you do, leave a comment below. Perhaps it will be your voice that opens the door to the next chapter. And maybe by now, like me, your heart feels heavy. A Doberman puppy only days old, clawing her way back from a dump of filth and poison, and a man who chose not to turn away. From Faith's grave, a fragile life called Hope was reborn. But let me ask you, have you ever saved an animal? Have you ever bent down when others turned away to give a small life the chance to go on? If so, share your story in the comments. Who knows? Your story might be the spark that inspires someone else to reach out and save another life. Thank you for listening to today's story all the way through. If your heart is stirred, don't forget to subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Because this is only the beginning. Ahead still lie the mysteries of Faith's death, and the trials of protecting Hope are far from over. See you in part 2, where the truth will slowly be revealed. Stay with us, because sometimes a single outstretched hand can change the course of a life.